What is up, everybody? Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to Nazarene Way Church. You're in for the frickin' ride of your life. This is gonna be like no other quote-unquote church experience that you have ever been a part of. And I want to say thank you to my amazing congregation. My congregation at this juncture in this journey entails my beautiful, loving, amazing, supportive wife, who is sitting behind the camera, my amazing, incredible, well-named son named Fitzgerald Scott Shepard, after the writer F. Scott Fitzgerald, aka known as Fitzy. My audience and my congregation also includes Mr. Frank, who's sitting right there. He's a rat terrier, and he's looking up at me like, what the heck are you up to now, Rabbi, aka Teacher Scott? And then we've got Brodus, my cat, roaming around, and then Fiona is wherever the heck Fiona always is. Anyway, just like the early Nazarenes and the Jerusalem church right after Jesus' time, the services were actually held in synagogues for a little bit, and then the Nazarenes, aka the followers of Jesus, were kicked out of the synagogues, which you're about to find out here soon. As well, so the reason that is important is because they held a lot of the services in homes, which is where I am holding this service right here and right now. And before we get going, you're probably wondering, like, what the heck is a Nazarene? And, you know, a Nazarene, we don't necessarily, we celebrate the customs and the laws of the Torah, Judaism. Yet we believe in Jesus, the Nazarene was the Messiah. Yet you may be looking in the background and you see like Christmas decorations, which actually I declare Christmas is not a Christian holiday. It's actually a pagan holiday, crafted after, it was actually invented in the 1800s. We don't need to get into that, but because I am a Nazarene and a man of compromise and have an amazing, loving wife who loves frickin' Christmas, guess what? The Nazarenes, in this household at least, celebrate Christmas. However, we also believe that the birth of Jesus becoming the Son of Man actually happened at the baptism of John the Baptist, which is outlined at the very beginning of Mark, the earliest written gospel. All right, with that preamble out of the way, we're going to jump right freaking into it. And I'm going to share with you the sermon, the very first sermon of the Nazarene Way Church, which is, Jesus was neither a Jew nor a Christian. I realize that's a bold statement. And my wife isn't as shocked because she sees me reading books and she hears my frickin' rants and ramblings, and she's used to it, so she's immune to it. To some of you, this may seem like a shock. You were taught that, oh, Jesus was a Jew. Or, you know, a lot of people know that Jesus probably people know that Jesus was not a Christian, but they say, yes, but he was a Jew, right? He was neither, and I'm going to prove that to you. Jesus was a Nazarene. There's evidence for this inside of the New Testament and outside of the New Testament. The first piece of evidence comes from Matthew. And the Gospel of Matthew is actually seen as the most Jewish gospel. It was written for and really catered to the Jewish people at the time, who then converted and accepted Jesus, aka Yeshua, was his real name, by the way. Jesus is a Greek name. They accepted Yeshua as the Messiah. Anyway, the evidence inside of the New Testament comes from Matthew chapter 2, verse 23. And the verse is, "And he went and lived in a city called Nazareth, so that what was spoken by the prophets must be fulfilled, that he would be called a," quote, "Nazarene." Now, here's the interesting part. All of the scholars throughout the last 2,000 years have debated. They're like, where does it say in the Hebrew Bible, which is called the Tanakh, okay? There's no such thing as the Old Testament. That is some incantation invented by the Hellenistic, Greek, Roman Catholics after, and it's kind of a derisive derision towards the Jewish people, okay? The Tanakh is also known as the Hebrew Bible. It is what Jesus observed, okay? And in the Tanakh, aka the Hebrew Bible, scholars and followers of Jesus and Christians and Catholics have scoured the entire Hebrew Bible for where the prophets say that he would be called a Nazarene. Guess what? They cannot find any evidence that he will be called a Nazarene exists. What they found was, what they were referring to here is that they were alluding to a verse in Isaiah chapter 11, verse 11, whereas they say the Messiah will be a Netzer. Netzer, which is formed the stem and the root of Nazareth, and it means branch. Now it's like a branch of Galilee, or in the verse of Isaiah, it was the branch of David. The Messiah, it was said, will be of the branch of David. Now, what's odd about this? Let's talk about what's odd about this. What's odd about this is that in Mark, there's no genealogy laid out in the first 2 chapters. Whereas in Matthew starts out weird. It lists out like 50 different names that stem where Jesus stems from. And it starts with, at the very, very top, right? And it starts with David's lineage, the branch of David, right? So that is an important part. What's also interesting about that is, where does the branch end? Well, it ends with Joseph. That's kind of odd. Isn't Jesus supposed to not have been fathered by Joseph? Isn't he supposed to have been fathered by God? So wouldn't the branch need to have really stemmed down to Mary? That's odd. Nazarenes and Ebionites, which is essentially the Hebrew word for the poor ones. The Nazarenes actually evolved into Ebionites. They do not accept the virgin birth. They believe that Jesus was born naturally of Joseph. Joseph was of the Netzer, the branch of David, as is prescribed by the messianic prophecy. Anyway, long story short, Jesus was a Nazarene. He was a Nazarene as declared in the New Testament, and as part of the Nazarene Way, being a Nazarene and of the branch has like a double entendre in which we know that he was of the branch of David. Okay, so that's the first point, just to warm up your mind. Now, here's the second point. Internally, the Nazarenes called themselves people of the way. The people of the way, that term is actually found in Acts. You have read Acts and the quote-unquote New Testament with a lens, a Catholic-flavored lens, a essentially Pauline lens, which kind of tries to hand-wave all this other stuff away. Whereas if you look closely, and if you read Acts in the New Testament, you will see things like they were called followers of the way, or disciples of the way, and people of the way. And the people of the way, that term, preceded Nazarenes and Christians. Internally, they called themselves, we are people of the way. To outsiders, because they were from Nazareth, the outsiders around the time called them the Nazarenes. Like they were the Nazarenes. But internally, they were known as the people of the way. And as the biblical scholar James Tabor points out, the early followers of John, aka John the Baptist, and Jesus referred to themselves as the people of the way, even before terms like Nazarene or Christian were used. So why were they referred to as people of the way? Where did the way come from, right? It actually comes from the Hebrew Bible. The Old Testament is what they call it. In one of the prophets, they said, a Messiah will come forth and pave the way. Okay, and you will create the way. And they talk about the way frequently in the Hebrew Bible. Now, there's this two kind of Messiah, essentially, theory. The first Messiah was John, who would pave the way for the coming King Messiah, the King of the Jews, which was Jesus. So around that time, they always called themselves people of the way. Now, I realize this is a bold claim, everything of what I'm saying. In fact, it may sound like blasphemy to your, Roman Catholic ears, right? And even if you are a quote-unquote Christian, I'm not a Catholic, I'm Christian, right? I'm into the popular Christianity, or I'm this branch of Christianity. Guess what? everything that is in your branch and in Christianity stemmed from Catholicism. And you like it or not, the way that you view the Bible and read the Bible all really stems and goes back to Catholicism. Fitzy's enjoying this, by the way, this sermon. Okay, hopefully you can tell. Anyway, here's what I'm getting at. I realize that everything that I am saying right now sounds like absolute heresy and blasphemy. Okay? But I'm saying that Jesus was not a Jew, nor was he a Christian. But it's not just me that's saying that. Let's ask Epiphanius. Here is Epiphanius, a widely celebrated Catholic bishop. He's known as a patristic church father, okay? The patristic means father, so they're, a patristic father, the founders of the Catholic Church and the faith that shaped it in the 2nd century, the 3rd century, the 4th century. They're known as patristic fathers, where they debated, they took Paul's messages and Paul's words, and they declared and debated and shaped the faith of Catholicism. So let's refer to Epiphanius. What does he say? So Epiphanius is interesting. He is a man who went on an unhinged rampage, decrying in detail 80 beliefs at the time that he found to be heresies. You see, there wasn't just one Christianity after Jesus died. There was like 80 different versions of what they believed about him. Epiphanius, and it's a very actually interesting book and a read. The Panarion is a book where it's very, very entertaining. He just goes crazy. Fitzy's loving this, by the way. Epiphanius, it's actually, if you read the New Testament at the time and some of the other texts, some of the stuff is kind of dense and hard to read, whereas Epiphanius, it's really kind of a fun, enjoyable read, even though he just goes absolutely nuts against all of these different religions. Well, ironically, one of the heresies that he outlined in his Panarion, which he just goes on a rant against 80 different religions and sects of a religion, was the religion of Jesus of Nazareth and all of Jesus' original followers, all of the apostles, known as the Nazarenes. What's ironic about this is that one of the ways we know so much about the Nazarenes is because, thankfully, he went on a rampage against the Nazarenes. And I'm going to read to you what he said. Epiphanius said this about the Nazarenes. He said, "The Nazarenes are perfectly versed in the Hebrew language, for the entire law, the prophets, and the so-called writings, I mean the poetic books, Kings, Chronicles, Esther, and all the rest are read in Hebrew among them, as of course they are among the Jews. The Nazarenes are different from the Jews and different from the Christians." Okay, I want to read that again. Jesus was a Nazarene. We know he was declared a Nazarene in Matthew. And we have a guy admonishing them and saying the Nazarenes are different from Jews and different from Christians. So let me ask you this. If we know that Jesus was a Nazarene and the Catholic, pagan, Roman church father says, oh, Nazarenes are not like Jews and not like Christians, then if you're a Christian, why are you a Christian? Why don't you follow the original religion of Jesus the Nazarene and all of his followers, all of the apostles? Let's keep going. They disagree with Jews, aka they meaning the Nazarenes, because of their belief in Christ, meaning the Nazarenes believed that Jesus was the Messiah, aka the Son of Man, in Hebrew known as Ben Adam, or in Aramaic Ben Adam, which means Ben, which means son of, Adam means man, son of Adam, son of man. They disagree with Jews because of their belief in Christ, but they are not in accord with Christians because they are still fettered by the law. Circumcision, the Sabbath, and the rest. What does fettered mean? Do you know? Does anyone know? It means chained at the ankle. He's admonishing and degrading the Nazarenes because they are still chained to following circumcision, the 10 Commandments, the Hebrew Bible, celebrating the Sabbath from Friday night from now until Saturday night. So that's interesting. Epiphanius is saying, oh, we don't like the Nazarenes because they still follow and are chained and observe the law. Well, here's what's interesting, ladies and gentlemen. Here's the irony. According to Epiphanius, the Nazarenes were unfettered, aka chained to the law, and that was a bad thing. Well, Jesus was clearly and passionately fettered to the law. He proudly chained himself and his followers and his people to the true law of God. Okay? And meaning, and you're going to find this out in a second, meaning there's a lot of these people that lose sight and they start doing all this crazy stuff. Maybe just walk into, and I'm not here to bash the Catholics, but walk into the Catholic Church and go to a service. You stand up and sit down 50 frickin' times. Do you think that's more important than walking outside and talking to a homeless person, a poor one, like Jesus ascribed to do, like James, Jesus' brother, commanded you to do, and to feed them, treat them as actual human beings and talk to them? That is what Jesus was getting at. Jesus was saying, you need to follow the law. And the law, in Jesus' interpretation, was love. And as scholar James Tabor points out, Jesus wore fringed tassets. I meant to type tassels. I was preparing this really fast. Tassels, aka known as tzitzits, on his outer garment. What are tzitzits? Well, they're these things that I wear. Okay, they're there to remind you of the Torah, of the law. Okay, and actually, if you watch the series The Chosen, you will see a scene in where the woman tugs, and this is in the New Testament, tugs at the fringes, the tzitzits of Jesus' cloak, and is instantly healed. Okay, that's what they're talking about, the fringes of his cloak. This indicates his strict observance to the mitzvah, or commandments of the Torah or Jewish law. So isn't it interesting? We have this Catholic bishop saying, oh, yeah, the Nazarenes, they're not as great as Christians because they follow the law. Well, guess who else followed the law and observed the law? And was passionate and fettered to the law, chained to the law, out of love. That man's name was Jesus the Nazarene, Jesus of Nazareth. So don't take my word for it that Jesus was not a Jew or a Christian. We have the Catholic Church Father telling us that. But here's the thing. Epiphanius declares Jesus' religion, the Nazarenes, as neither Jewish nor Christian. Is he the only one? Was I just using him and just going to, evolve this entire premise of my claim on just Epiphanius? Let's ask another church father, Jerome, otherwise known as Saint Jerome. We can get into him. Saint Jerome, there's a lot with him. He was actually born very, very wealthy and would just sit in a lair like that and read and write all day and just, decry, and he was a big fan of Epiphanius, decry blasphemy and heresy and persecute Nazarenes and persecute Jews, just like, the Christians 200 years prior to him were persecuted. Isn't that interesting? Anyway, one more thing about Jerome. Some scholars have found that some of the things he says are just outright proven, he stretches the truth to the max, which is quite interesting. So not everything that Jerome says can be taken literally. He kind of says that, oh, I did this or that to bolster his, credibility. It's interesting to read up on these patristic church fathers, and I don't think that they were evil, but I think they were swayed by a very slippery slope known as Pauline's religion, Paul's religion that Paul invented, which we now know as Christianity. Anyway, on the Nazarenes, Jerome said that while the Nazarenes will be both Jews and Christians, they are neither Jews nor Christians. Okay, so we have two people saying that, Nazarenes, the original followers, in Jesus' original religion, he was neither a Jew or a Christian. Christians weren't the only ones, however, to admonish admonish and the original religion of Jesus the Nazarene and persecute Jesus' original followers or his original people. Jews also persecuted the Nazarenes. And there's another example, but I'm just going to share this one, okay? Which the other example is even more severe. But we'll jump into this one. The Nazarenes faced persecution from both Christians and Jews. They were banned from synagogues in Jerusalem, immediately after the death of Jesus. That's why they had to meet quietly and in secret in Jerusalem in houses. They were banished from synagogues. A daily Jewish ritual was composed by Samuel the Younger in the 2nd century. Samuel the Younger was, a Jew. And it was repeated daily by the Jews. This was called a curse that Jews in the synagogues repeated every single day. And it was, "Let there be no hope for the apostates, the Nazarenes, and let all the sectaries," sect meaning a group of people, right, "perish as in a moment." There's an even worse curse out there as well, but we don't need to get into that. Later on, I'm going to, let's jump into this. Well, before I go into that, because it's really dangerous to say, oh, the Jews persecuted the Nazarenes. Then later on, the Jews from the year 500 to the medieval times, they were completely persecuted, horribly by the Christians. So it's and then the Christians lumped the Nazarenes and the Jews into one bucket. So after the fall of the Jerusalem temple in 70 A.D. and then the revolt of Bar Kokhba, the Romans and the Christians lumped Jews and Nazarenes into one bucket, persecuted them, and then within that one bucket of persecution, the Jews then also persecuted the Nazarenes. So if you want to ask yourself, hey, why aren't the Nazarenes, why didn't they survive? Why did the Christians survive? Well, it's because the Christians took and ensconced the Roman, basically, the Roman government and got married and ensconced to one another and allied themselves with one another. And therein you find the stuff where certain things were written, like Pontius Pilate said, "I wipe my hands clean of this. What do you want to do? Do you want to kill him?" Pontius Pilate, "I'm the Roman," right? I don't want to kill Jesus. Oh, and then, the story happens where the Jews persecute them. So that's kind of like the survival there. So anyway, let's dive into this. The Nazarenes died off due to triple persecution. People talk about how Christians were persecuted by Romans under Nero, the Emperor Nero. But for Nazarene, the original religion of Jesus and his followers, they were persecuted by Romans, Christians, and Jews. As the 4th century came to a close, the Nazarenes were now, according to the biblical scholar Hugh Schonfield, wholly discarded by the Catholic Church and reserved exclusively for the heresy of the faith which Jesus had founded. Isn't that crazy? Great. Jesus was a Nazarene, not a Jew or a Christian. Now what? What did the Nazarenes believe? Here are 3 things. We can get into, probably the rest of my sermons are going to be on the things that the Nazarenes believed, one at a time. There's probably 25 core tenets of the Nazarenes' beliefs. However, I'm going to give you 3 to leave tonight's sermon with. The first is the Nazarenes observed the law. They practiced the Sabbath on Saturdays, not Sundays. That is a pagan Roman idea. They practice it on Saturdays. They observed the Hebrew Bible. They observed the 10 Commandments. They wore tzitzits. They did not say, oh, that's the Old Testament. That's the Old Testament. No, that is the Testament. That is the Testament of Jesus. The New Testament is half postcards and half, narrative stories, right? Influenced by certain entities and certain people. And half of the postcards were written by Paul, who a lot of the Nazarenes considered an apostate from the law. He didn't know Jesus. He says he saw a sign of Jesus, a white light of Jesus, 7 years after the death of Jesus. And then he went on a rampage preaching like a crazy freaking maniac. And then, Paul was a Hellenistic from Tarsus. He was a Greek-Roman citizen, right? And so the Romans could relate to Paul, right? But guess what? All the followers, all the people that knew Jesus, all the people that followed Jesus, they were Nazarenes. They were followers of the way. So, followers of the way and Jesus, who wore tzitzits, observed the law. The second thing that Nazarenes believed is they prioritized two laws above all others. And I'm going to read you that. That's in Matthew. And then the third thing is that they believed in action over faith, with an emphasis on the poor. So, I'm not going to get into the first one, because what we've covered so far over this entire sermon has been the first one. But I'm going to share the last two with you in detail, and then we're going to close out this sermon and send you on your way. So the two most important laws according to Jesus, the Nazarene, is when the Pharisees heard that he had, meaning he had silenced the Sadducees. And let me point something out. The Sadducees were Jews who were very wealthy, who ran the temple and got all the tithes from all the animal sacrifices and all the burnt offerings, which pissed Jesus off. Jesus' brother, James the Just, was a vegetarian. They believed in love, right? And one of the ideas here is that, when Jesus went and threw over the money changers, people were changing the money hands because all of that money and all that transactions were done for purchasing all the different animals to slaughter for the burnt offerings, which the Sadducees made an absolute killing on, literally and figuratively. A killing in terms of killing a ton of animals, but a killing in terms of money. Because, hey, do you want your sins to be forgiven? Do you want to go to heaven? Okay, then buy these 2 doves or buy this lamb and slaughter it and burn it. How much is it? Oh, it's $10,000, right? They made a killing off of that business. That's who the Sadducees were. They gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked Jesus a question to test him. Teacher, aka rabbi. Jesus was a rabbi, by the way. Okay, he was not a priest. He was not a pastor. He was a teacher. He was not a guy that walked around with a fancy robe on made of gold, putting incense everywhere, and chanting weird crap. He was a teacher. That's it. They said to him, Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest? He said to him, You shall love the Lord God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Only these 2 commandments hang all the law, or on these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Okay? Now, some people, the Christians, the Catholics, said, oh, okay, so those are the only 2 things that matter, right? No, he didn't say nothing else matters. He said, those are the 2 at the top. All of the others fall under them. Those are the 2 most critical priorities of the law. Jesus said, I did not come to abolish the law, later on in Matthew. He said, I have come to fulfill it. Meaning, I am the Messiah, I'm going to fulfill the law. Continue to practice it. To continue, unlike Epiphanius, said, continue to be fettered upon the law. Jesus was fettered upon the law. Jesus observed the law. Guess who did not observe the law? Ironically, the Catholic bishops, the shapers of the Catholic Church, the shapers of Christianity. What we need to do is we need to fork Christianity and Catholicism back to the root, back to the branch, the Netzer, the Nazarene, Jesus the Nazarene. I'm going to end with this. There's one other cornerstone of Jesus' faith. The book of James is relegated to the back of the Bible. It's almost written out. Jesus very clearly in Mark and all of the Gospels has brothers. His youngest brother was named James, otherwise known as James the Just. Why was he known as James the Just? Because he observed the law. He was very just. He was also known as James the Righteous. Well, James has a book in the Bible, but guess what? It is crammed like right after all of Paul's crazy sayings, and it is hidden next to another book in the Bible by Jude, another of Jesus's brothers that you can read about. And they're named in the frickin' Gospels, in the Gospel of Mark, right? So in the book of James, James says, you see that a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. Paul of Tarsus, who never knew Jesus the Nazarene, who never was a Nazarene, who was actually falsely accused of being the ringleader of the Nazarenes in Acts because he was so, outrageous and charismatic out there, right? Paul's whole message was that, hey, none of that matters. You don't have to, follow the Torah. Who cares about the 10 Commandments? Who cares about wearing a tzitzit? All you need to have is, faith. Who cares about feeding the poor? Who cares about actions? Faith is faith and faith alone in Jesus, not Jesus in the flesh, but Jesus in the spirit. Why? And the reason why Paul denigrated Jesus in the flesh, guess why? It's because Paul didn't meet Jesus in the flesh. So he wanted to undermine the importance of Jesus in the flesh. And therefore he said, but guess who knew Jesus in the flesh? His actual brother. And guess what Jesus' brother said? James the Just. He said, it is a person's actions and not by faith alone that one finds the true message of Jesus the Nazarene. When Paul was sent back to Jerusalem, the head of Jerusalem church, known as the three pillars of Jerusalem, were James the righteous, James the just, the brother of Jesus. His right hand was called Simon Peter, aka Cephas in Hebrew, otherwise known as Peter, right? Who the Catholics take one phrase and one verse out of context of the rock and say, oh, okay, so that makes Peter the very first pope. Which is also kind of ironic, because aren't popes supposed to be celibate and not allowed to be married? Well, guess who Peter brought with him in every single step of his journey? His wife. So the very first pope ever that the Catholics claim, lineage to, had a wife and actually reported to James the Just, the brother of Jesus, who is relegated and basically almost written out of the entire Bible. And then you have John, the apostle, okay? Those were the three pillars of Jerusalem. Well, Paul's message was getting so outlandish and so crazy that Paul was summoned back to answer to James the Just. And James said, hey, Paul, you need to teach the actual true. And he made a compromise and said, don't worry, you don't have to have Gentiles who are, 40, 50 years old, circumcise themselves, okay? We'll still accept them, but they still need to follow the Torah, the law that Jesus followed, that the Nazarenes followed. And so that is what James said to Paul. But before he sent Paul off, he also said, and you need to go and prioritize the Ebionites. What are Ebionites? Well, guess what? Ebionites are yet another heresy declared by Epiphanius, a church father. Ebionites means in Hebrew, it's a Hebrew term that means the poor ones. James said, you need to go and prioritize and feed and take action and love and donate to the Ebionites, the poor ones. So from James, who was clearly a Nazarene and the leader of the Nazarenes after the death of Jesus the Nazarene, we find that James said, it is through works and not by lazy faith alone, and by prioritizing the poor ones, the Ebionites, that one follows in the ways of Jesus of Nazareth, the Nazarene. That gives you a taste of what the Nazarenes believe. And now you know the truth, that Jesus was not a Christian, nor was he a Jew. Put simply, he was a Nazarene. If you want to follow the Nazarenes and the people of the way, then tune in and get ready, because we're about to create a frickin' movement that is going to restore the original faith, the original religion, and the original practices of Jesus the Nazarene. That is the Nazarene way. Peace and love, Shabbat Shalom, and let's go frickin' rock and roll this week and take action. Feed the poor, peace and love. Scott P. Shepper, your teacher, your rabbi, over and out. Peace.